Day 679, Saturday, June 21st. Ezra 4, 6-24. Ezra 4, 6-24, NKJV. In the reign of Ahasuerus, in the beginning of his reign, they wrote an accusation against the inhabitants of Judah and Jerusalem. In the days of Artaxerxes also, Bishlam, Mithridath, Tabal, and the rest of their companions wrote to Artaxerxes, king of Persia, and the letter was written in Aramaic script and translated into the Aramaic language. Rehum the commander and Shimshai the scribe wrote a letter against Jerusalem to King Artaxerxes in this fashion. From Rehum the commander, Shimshai the scribe, and the rest of their companions, representatives of the Danites, the Apharsathchites, the Tarpelites, the people of Persia, and Erech, and Babylon, and Shushan, the Dahavites, the Elamites, and the rest of the nations whom the great and noble Osnappar took captive and settled in the cities of Samaria, and the remainder beyond the river, and so forth. This is a copy of the letter that they sent him. To King Artaxerxes from your servants, the men of the region beyond the river, and so forth, let it be known to the king that the Jews, who came up from you, have come to us at Jerusalem, and are building the rebellious and evil city, and are finishing its walls and repairing the foundations. Let it now be known to the king that, if this city is built and the walls completed, they will not pay tax, tribute, or custom, and the king's treasury will be diminished. Now because we receive support from the palace, it was not proper for us to see the king's dishonor. Therefore we have sent and informed the king, that search may be made in the book of the records of your fathers. And you will find in the book of the records and know that this city is a rebellious city, harmful to kings and provinces, and that they have incited sedition within the city in former times, for which cause this city was destroyed. We inform the king that if this city is rebuilt and its walls are completed, the result will be that you will have no dominion beyond the river. The king sent an answer to Rehum the commander, to Shimshai the scribe, to the rest of their companions who dwell in Samaria, and to the remainder beyond the river, peace, and so forth. The letter which you sent to us has been clearly read before me, and I gave the command, and a search has been made, and it was found that this city in former times has revolted against kings, and rebellion and sedition have been fostered in it. There have also been mighty kings over Jerusalem, who have ruled over all the region beyond the river, and tax, tribute, and custom were paid to them. Now give the command to make these men cease, that this city may not be built until the command is given by me. Take heed now that you do not fail to do this. Why should damage increase to the hurt of the kings? Now when the copy of King Artaxerxes' letter was read before Rehum, Shimshai the scribe, and their companions, they went up in haste to Jerusalem against the Jews, and by force of arms made them cease. Thus the work of the house of God which is at Jerusalem ceased, and it was discontinued until the 2nd year of the reign of Darius king of Persia. Daily Deep Dive, the UCG reading plan states, the chronology of this passage is debated based on differing opinions regarding the identity of the Persian kings mentioned within it. Recall from verses 4-5 that the Samaritans were constantly attempting to thwart the Jews who had returned to Judea, the tiny Persian district of Yehud, efforts that often included accusing them before the Persian court. This continued throughout the reign of Cyrus the Great, yet Cyrus, whom God had foretold would give the word to restore Jerusalem and its temple, was not swayed by the Samaritan arguments, but he eventually passed from the scene. As historian Werner Keller writes, Cyrus the Liberator died on an expedition to the east in 530 BC, and was buried in the royal palace of Pasargadae, near Persepolis, 30 miles northeast of Shiraz in southern Iran. His palace was built in the form of individual pavilions. Each one lay in the center of a magnificent garden. The whole area was enclosed by a high wall. On the southern slopes of a long range of hills there still stands among the rough grass of the highlands a small unpretentious stone building dating from the time of Cyrus. 6 square blocks form the steps which lead up to a small chamber, above the entrance to which there could at one time be read the following plea. O man, whoever you are and whenever you come, for I know that you will come. I am Cyrus who gave the Persians their empire. Do not grudge me this patch of earth that covers my body. Alas, the small stone chamber in which a golden sarcophagus enclosed the mortal remains of the great Persian is now as empty as the place above the entrance which bore the inscription. Occasionally shepherds with their flocks pass unconcernedly by this forgotten spot, as they did in olden times, across the wide plateau where the lion is still lord of the chase. Cyrus was followed by his son Cambyses II, with the conquest of Egypt, in 525 BC. Persia became under him the greatest empire that the world had ever seen. It stretched from India to the Nile. The Bible is History, 1980, p. 303. According to verse 5, the Samaritans would continue to present their grievances against the Jews until the reign of Darius, king of Persia. This is generally recognized as referring to Darius Hystaspes, Darius I, not to be confused with the earlier Darius the Mede mentioned in Scripture. Royal identity dispute. The identity controversy mentioned above starts in the very first verse of our present reading, verse 6, with the identity of the Ahasuerus mentioned there, and continues through the rest of the chapter over the identity of Artaxerxes. The Darius of verse 24 is the same as the one in verse 5, as the temple was rebuilt during the reign of Darius I. Notice the succession of Persian emperors. With information for the anglicized Greek form of their name, Persian form of their name, and the dates of reign for each. Cyrus II the Great, Kurush, 559 to 530. Cambyses II, Cambogia, 530 to 522. Pseudo-Smyrtis Comates, Bardia Gaumata, 522. Darius I the Great Hystaspes, Dariavahush, Dariush, 522 to 486. Xerxes I the Great, Kshayarsha, 486 to 465. Artaxerxes or Longimanus, Artaxerxes or Ardashir, 465,425. Xerxes, 2. Kshayarsha, 424. Cecidianus Sogdianus, known only in Greek, 424. Darius II, Aucus, Nothus, Dariavahush, Dariush, 423,404. Artaxerxes II Nemon, Artaxerxes, 404 to 359. 8. Artaxerxes III, Ochus, Artaxerxes, 359 eighths, 338 sevenths. Artaxerxes IV Arses, Artaxerxes 338, 7 to 336. Darius III, Codomanus, Dariavahush, Dariush, 336,330. So who is the Ahasuerus of Ezra 4, 6? This name is now generally understood as a parallel to the Greek name Xerxes. Notice that the Persian form is Kshayarsha. Where the name Ahasuerus occurs in Scripture, the actual Hebrew form is Akshurosh, much closer to the Persian form of Kshayarsha. Of Xerxes, the Jewish Encyclopedia states, the Babylonian tablets spell his name Kiziarshu, Akshiarshu, etc. Ahasuerus, Jewish Encyclopedia. And what of the name Artaxerxes? Where this name appears in Scripture, the actual Hebrew form is Artaxerxes. The Jewish Encyclopedia explains, in the Persian name Artaxerxes, the thar is pronounced with a hissing sound, and is therefore represented in other languages by an s or sh, thus in Babylonian Artaxerxes, Artaxerxes, and numerous variations in Hebrew, Artaxerxes, in Greek, Artaxerxes. And by assimilation with the name Xerxes, it becomes Artaxerxes, Artaxerxes I, Jewish Encyclopedia. It would seem then that Ahasuerus in Ezra 4:6 is King Xerxes I, the husband of Esther, and Artaxerxes in verses 7 to 23 would appear to be Artaxerxes I, the king under whom Nehemiah later served. If that is the case, as most scholars now maintain, then chapters 4 to 6 are out of sequence. Here's how the Expositor's Bible Commentary explains. Ezra 4. This chapter summarizes various attempts to thwart the efforts of the Jews. In VV 1 to 5, the author describes events under Cyrus, 539 to 530, in V6 under Xerxes, 485 to 465, in VV 7 to 23. Under Artaxerxes I, 464 to 424. He then reverts in V24 to the time of Darius I, 522 to 486. When the temple was completed, cf. Hag, the author drew on Aramaic documents from Ezra 4 v 8 to 6:18, with a further Aramaic section in 7:12 to 26. Note on 4 1 to 5. Chapters 5 to 6 concern events during the reign of Darius I. Chapter 7 advances the story to the time of Artaxerxes I. Following the above interpretation, Erdman's Handbook to the Bible has this to say in its note on Ezra 4 verses 1 to 5:24. The opposition succeeds in bringing the work on the temple to a standstill for 15 years until Darius is king. Verses 6 to 23 interrupt the chronological sequence to carry the account of the opposition through to the time of Ezra and Nehemiah. Here the bone of contention is the rebuilding of the city walls, verse 12. This would mean Ezra interrupted the sequence of the book to drop in an overview of the antagonism even beyond the time of Darius, which seems a likely conclusion, especially given the mention of the city and its walls in the correspondence rather than the temple. However, there is another school of thought that sees Ezra 4th as presented in chronological order, wherein the Ahasuerus, or Xerxes of verse 6, is another name for Cyrus son Cambyses, 530 to 522, and the Artaxerxes of verses 7 to 23 is a reference to the impostor King Gaumata, 522, who posed as Cambyses' slain brother Bardia Smerdis. Expositors notes, some scholars claim that the parallel account in Josephus' Antiquities of the Jews, Book 11, chapters 21 to 25, which substitutes Cambyses for Artaxerxes I, gives the correct order note on verse 7. Yet what of the fact that the names Xerxes and Artaxerxes are specifically applied to other kings? Some historians believe that the names Ahasuerus, Ahasuerus, Xerxes and Artashasta, Artaxerxes, were general titles for kings such as Pharaoh and Shah or His Majesty, and that they were not specific names. Alan Hunsinger, Persians in the Bible, p. 32. Yet it seems more likely that the majority opinion is correct, that these names refer to Xerxes I and Artaxerxes I. This would seem to be more consistent with other passages and avoids the problem of assigning these appellations to whomever seems to fit. Indeed, one might wonder why these names are used in Scripture, if they provide no identification of particular kings. Regarding Josephus' identification, Expositors notes, H.G.M. Williamson, Israel, in the Books of Chronicles, 1977. p. 50 points out that, at Ezra 4, it seems likely that the author has grouped by theme rather than by chronology. Josephus' corrections, therefore, which rest from one point of view on accurate historical knowledge, result in the end in unhistorical confusion, cf. Also C.G. Tooland, Ezra Nehemiah or Nehemiah Ezra. Andrews University Seminary Studies, 12 Josephus, 1974. Note on verse 7. The truth is that we can't know the answer to this matter for sure either way. It should be noted that, if the majority opinion is correct, as seems likely, then we are reading the current passage out of chronological sequence. However, that is really no dilemma since, in any case, we are reading the verses in order of scriptural arrangement, which, if not in chronological sequence, is nevertheless thematically consistent here. We will note these verses again, where they more likely occur chronologically. Letter-writing campaign against Jewish rebuilding, whoever the Ahasuerus of verse 6 is, whether Cambyses or the Great Persian Emperor known as Xerxes I, see previous comments, he apparently paid no heed to the Samaritan complaints. In verse 7 Artaxerxes, whether Pseudo-Smerdis or Artaxerxes I again see previous comments, at first pays no heed either. But another letter in verses 8 to 16 gets his attention. Verses 9 to 10 identifies the plaintiffs as descendants of those the Assyrians had transplanted from the east into the land of Samaria after the northern tribes of Israel had been deported. Osnappar is evidently another name for the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal, 668,626 billion c. His resettlement of people into Samaria was in addition to that of Esarhaddon, 681 to 668 BC, mentioned in verse 2, where the NKJV has the Danites, the Apharsachchites, the Tarpelites, the people of Persia and Erech and Babylon and Shushan, the Dehavites, the Elamites, verse 9. The NIV has instead the judges and officials over the men from Tripolis, Persia, Erech and Babylon, the Elamites of Susa. See the Expositor's Bible commentary for a technical explanation of the differences here. In identifying their nationalities, the Samaritans emphasize the kinship many of them share with the Persian authorities. Furthermore, the Samaritans refer to themselves in the letter as your servants, verse 12, implying a faithful vassal relationship. By contrast, they refer to Jerusalem as the rebellious and evil city, verse 12, and warn that the Jews will again revolt if they manage to rebuild and fortify it, verses 13 to 14. A search of the king's official records confirmed the Samaritans' allegation of rebellion and sedition on the part of the people of Jerusalem, no doubt referring to the revolts under Jehoiakim, Jehoiachin, and Zedekiah, see 2 Kings 24, 1-20. The fact that these revolts were against the Babylonians and not against the Persians was not important. The Persians had become the heirs of the Babylonian Empire, and they would take such a report seriously. The Nelson Study Bible, note on Ezra 4:19. Evidently Cyrus's decree regarding the Jews in Jerusalem had been forgotten by this point, as the Persians had an important precedent of unchangeable law, see Daniel 6:8, 12, 15. It is also interesting to note in the king's response that he discovered that past kings of Jerusalem had ruled over all the region west of the Euphrates River, Ezra 4:20, evidently referring to David and Solomon, and perhaps a few later kings who had experienced periods of dominance over nearby nations. The Persian ruler commands that the restoration of Jerusalem be brought to a halt, but he leaves open the possibility of a change in policy, saying that this city may not be rebuilt until the command is given by me, verse 21. If the Artaxerxes here is pseudos murtis, it would appear that the directive is later overturned, when the next king, Darius I, finds the earlier decree of Cyrus, see Ezra 6. If the Artaxerxes in chapter 4 is the one known to history as Artaxerxes I, as most scholars believe, then the king ends up reviewing his own decision and issuing commands regarding rebuilding to Ezra and Nehemiah. One important factor to note is that if the chapter is in chronological sequence, then the Jews were evidently forced to stop work on the temple. Ezra 4:24, when imperial decree and force of arms brought the rebuilding of Jerusalem to a halt, verses 17-23. But if the chapter is, according to the majority view, out of sequence, then the Jews simply gave up in the face of ongoing resistance, Ezra 4:4-5, 24. Once again, the latter seems more likely given that there is no reference to the work having been forced to cease when the rebuilding is questioned in chapter 5. The latter also seems more in line with Haggai's criticism of the Jewish neglect of temple reconstruction in the second year of Darius, see Haggai 1:1-11. In any case, Ezra 4 ends with the fact of temple reconstruction ceasing until Darius's second year, verses 24. The recommencement and completion of the temple during the reign of Darius is the subject of the next two chapters in Ezra. It may be of interest to note significant events transpiring elsewhere in the world at this time. It was during this period that Gautama Siddhartha Buddha lived and taught in India ca. 563,483 billion c. and Kung-Fu-Tzu Confucius lived and taught in China ca. 551-479 BC. This was nearly 1,000 years after the time of Moses, and nearly half a millennium from Solomon's building of the first temple. End.